All right, guys, let's watch Solo Leveling.
Dr. Lee, the chief physician of Seoul Ilshin Hospital, was astonished by the incredible news. A patient with eternal sleep disease had woken up. However, Dr. Choi mentioned a crucial complication. The patient's guardian was insisting on an immediate discharge, despite the unusual circumstances surrounding the case. The patient had been bedridden for over 4 years, and Dr. Lee was adamant that it was far too soon to release her. The long period of immobility meant that her condition should have been fragile, leaving her body weak and incapable of supporting itself. But then Dr. Choi revealed something unexpected. All the patient's tests had come back normal. Remarkably, she was in perfect health and could even walk on her own. The situation was baffling. Dr. Lee found it hard to believe that someone who hadn't moved in years could be fully functional, let alone ready to leave the hospital. He speculated that the life support machines might have somehow preserved her body's strength, though he couldn't be sure. Despite this miraculous recovery, Dr. Lee insisted that they couldn't just discharge her without further observation. Such a case needed to be reported to the medical community. It was a phenomenon that defied explanation and could provide valuable insights. Dr. Choi tried to reason with the patient's guardian, but it was clear that this was no ordinary person. The guardian was none other than Sung Ji-nu, the country's newly recognized S-rank hunter. With his reputation and influence, it was difficult to argue against his wishes. Understanding the gravity of the situation, Dr. Lee decided it was best to comply with the guardian's wishes. He instructed Dr. Choi to proceed with the patient's discharge, masking his apprehension with a smile. Dr. Lee acknowledged that they couldn't force a healthy patient to stay against her will. Gina dropped everything and rushed to the hospital as soon as she received the call. Gina, with tears streaming down her face, calling out for their mother. Kyung-hye, their mother, was surprised to see how much Gina had grown. She had last seen her daughter when she was in middle school, and now Gina was a young adult. Despite her initial surprise, she quickly recovered and welcomed Gina with open arms and a warm smile. Gina ran into her mother's embrace, unable to contain her emotions. JeJu watched this reunion with a heavy heart. He knew it wasn't the best way to treat someone who had just woken up from a 4-year coma, but he couldn't bring himself to stop his sobbing sister. Gina usually acted mature for her age, so it was easy to forget that she was still technically a child.
We're restarting the JeJu arc. I'm not sure if you guys follow Solo Leveling, but you guys should really check it out. I just can't wait for the episodes to come out.
Seeing her break down like this was painful for JeJu. JeJu fell into deep thought, feeling a profound sense of fulfillment, knowing that his efforts had led him to this moment. Yet a wave of nervousness washed over him as he realized that, as a hunter, he had crossed a bridge of no return. JeJu eventually walked out of the hospital, still grinning. He found a bench outside and sat down for a while, feeling a mix of relief and apprehension. After a few moments of reflection, he pulled out his cell phone, ready to move forward with whatever challenges lay ahead. His phone was flooded with countless missed calls and messages, and he couldn't even begin to reply to them all. After scrolling through the notifications for a bit, he gave up and cleared them, thinking that if anyone really needed to reach him.
Oh, okay. Nice to welcome you back, Thomas. Hey, have you heard Solo Leveling, Thomas? Really check it out.
They would try again. Instead, JeJu opened it.
I'm lazy to read manga, so I go on YouTube channels when they narrate it.
An internet browser. When he went to a news site, he saw something that made him frown. There were headlines about a magic beast spotted flying in the skies of downtown Seoul, questioning the destination of this creature and criticizing the Hunters Association.
You should check it out. You should check it out. It's about it's not like demons and all that stuff. But there's people called hunters that have like ways to combat them. And then either S rank, A rank, B rank, like the games. So the higher the rank, the stronger they are. But right now we're in part 1 of the JeJu Island arc. You should check it out. I'm streaming it for like 2 hours right now. So check it out. If you're doing stuff, just put it in your background and you'll get into it right away. It's like super popular right now.
For failing to respond. Reading through the anxious articles, he decided he shouldn't intentionally frighten people. While he was pondering this, his phone started vibrating. It was an unknown number. JeJu answered it. The call was from President Go Gun-hee of the Hunters Association. JeJu was surprised and curious about why the president would call him personally. President Go asked if JeJu had heard the news, but JeJu admitted he hadn't. He apologized, thinking the call was about Kaisel, but President Go's
Yeah, for sure, bro. Check it out, yo, whenever you can. I highly recommend it.
confused tone indicated they were not talking about the same thing. President Go's voice became deeper and more serious as he asked if they could speak in person. JeJu agreed, feeling even more curious about the matter. He offered to go to the president as he didn't want to involve his mother in any unnecessary complications. President Go appreciated this and agreed, making it more convenient for JeJu. JeJu reached Hunter Association. Go Gunhee showed him the video, recorded by a CCTV camera, was shocking. President Go explained that the creature in the video had killed 300 people. The ant monster had wreaked havoc in a Japanese village in less than 30 minutes before hunters could respond, despite Japan's efficient hunter network. This devastation made President Go worry about what would happen if such a creature attacked mainland Korea. The operation to exterminate these monsters was scheduled to begin in 4 days. Japan had been pressuring him for a list of participating Korean hunters, but he had delayed providing it because he couldn't contact JeJu until now. Finally, the time had come to finalize the list. President Go's heart raced as he addressed JeJu, explaining that they were planning to go to JeJu Island to eliminate the ants once and for all. His desperation was clear as he asked for JeJu's help. President Go knew that if JeJu refused, there would be nothing he could do. JeJu, not belonging to any guild and not being obligated to assist the association, held the decision entirely in his hands. Under normal circumstances, JeJu would eagerly seize the chance to face high-ranking beasts and level up. However, with his mother having just woken from a coma, his thoughts were consumed with concern for her and his sister. After the meeting with President Go wrapped up, JeJu was standing to leave, but suddenly sensed something strange. He felt clashes of mana nearby. His first thought was a dungeon break, but he quickly dismissed it. The mana clearly belonged to multiple hunters, not a magic beast. President Go, standing by the door to see JeJu out, noticed his sudden change in demeanor. JeJu mentioned that he sensed hunters fighting nearby, which seemed impossible to President Go. Gunhee, noticing JeJu's distraction, remarked with a laugh, praising JeJu for his sharp awareness. He explained that what JeJu felt was likely the intense activity of S-rank hunters nearby.
Oh man, it's getting good.
In preparation for the JeJu Island raid, which was only 4 days away. The chairman mentioned that even the renowned Japanese hunters, including the legendary Goto Ryuji, were present. President Go then mildly asked if JeJu would like to visit the gym himself. It was a rare occasion for all the S-rank hunters to gather together. As a newly minted S-rank, JeJu wouldn't want to miss the opportunity to see what the other S-ranks could do. Intrigued.
Yeah, so you guys know we're watching Solo Leveling. I just can't wait for the new episodes to come out, so I'm hearing the manga.
JeJu followed Chairman Gunhee to the gym. In the center of the room, a shirtless Bake was sparring with a massive middle-aged man. Bake batted away the other's hand, twisted his lower body, and delivered a powerful low kick. Yet it was Bake who grimaced. Despite Ma Dongwook's encouragement, Bake appeared to struggle, indicating the intensity of the training. The two men appeared to be having fun. Both Master Dongwook on the offensive and Bake on the defensive seemed to be enjoying themselves, relishing the rare opportunity to spar with a fellow S-rank. Gunhee pointed out the rarity of seeing so many S-rank hunters gathered in one place, suggesting that the mana JeJu felt earlier likely came from them. JeJu noticed Bake's difficulty in keeping up with Dongwook, though Gunhee reassured him that Bake's full power would be overwhelming for even Dongwook to handle. Yongin approached JeJu and struck up a conversation. The two exchanged nods and greeting, and Yongin explained that the man in the judogi was Dongwook from the famed guild. JeJu had heard the name before and realized he was a guild master of one of the top guilds. Curious, JeJu asked why President Bake was holding back. Yongin explained that Bake didn't like using his full power with so many people watching. When he went all out, he transformed into a real monster. Yongin also stated that there are more hunters who have gathered over her here for the raid. Izawa Ippei, Ishida Marie, Tanaka Kenzo, Hoshino Minoru, and Kimamoto Atsushi. JeJu recognized Goto Ryuji, the strongest hunter from Japan, immediately. He was tall and smartly dressed, with a neatly trimmed mustache. As the gathered hunters observed the new arrival, Shimizu questioned who he was. Hanekawa quickly identified him as Song Jinnu, a hunter who had recently been promoted to S rank. Goto, who had not sensed JeJu's approach, found this unsettling. Despite looking directly at JeJu, Goto still couldn't perceive his presence, leading him to suspect that JeJu might be an assassin-class hunter. This made Goto realize that JeJu must be exceptionally skilled. However, Hanekawa clarified that JeJu was a mage-type hunter, which seemed impossible to Goto until Hanekawa confirmed it had been officially verified. Lim Tae-gyu recognized JeJu as the one who had disrupted Minsung's debut. Cha Hae-in, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, deduced that JeJu was the cause. Amidst the gathering, Kay felt nauseous due to the number of S-rank hunters present. When she noticed Cha Hae-in, she speculated that Cha also had a sensitive nose, but was probably not as high-ranked as herself. Kay wondered if trying to converse with Cha might be misconstrued as flirting, regretting not having learned some Korean. Hanekawa commented on the mediocrity of South Korea's strongest hunters, which Goto questioned. Hanekawa attributed her lack of impression to having observed Goto's raids for a while. Goto, however, pointed out that Hae-in and Go Gun-hee seemed noteworthy and could rival Japan's best hunters. Park Jong-soo, the guild master of the Knights Guild, took offense at Hanekawa's remarks. Despite being only an A-rank hunter, he boasted about the guild's strength and his role in the upcoming JeJu raid. Hanekawa, unperturbed, revealed herself as an A-rank hunter from Japan, challenging Jong-soo's dismissive attitude. This led to a confrontation where Jong-soo proposed a simple contest. The first to grab the opponent's wrist would win. The confrontation between Hanekawa and Jong-soo escalated quickly. Despite Hanekawa's swift and aggressive attacks, Jong-soo dodged effortlessly. His confidence in his speed was evident as he maintained a defensive stance, taunting Hanekawa. Eventually, Jong-soo grabbed her wrist, ending the contest and demonstrating his superior combat experience. He explained that unlike magic beasts, predicting a human's next move was crucial.
See, that's what she gets for thinking that she's all that.
And his combat experience gave him an edge. Goto, observing the match, suggested sparring matches between the S-rank hunters from both countries to build trust. President Go Gun-hee agreed, with the condition that mage-type and non-combatant hunters be excluded due to the difficulty in judging such matches. Additional rules were proposed, including multiple hunters engaging simultaneously and the conditions for victory being expanded to touching the opponent's wrist or back or knocking them down. With these rules in place, the teams were set. South Korea would send out Baek, Ma Dong-wook, Cha Hae-in, and Lim Tae-gyu, while Japan would field Tanaka Kenzo, Hoshino Minoru, Kumamoto Atsushi, and Tawata Kanai. The stage was set for a series of intense matches that would showcase the skills and strengths of the top hunters from both nations. As JeJu observed the scene unfolding before him, he noticed that Goto Ryuji wasn't participating. He pondered over this, thinking that perhaps Goto simply wanted to gauge their strength. Nonetheless, witnessing a match between S-rank hunters was a rare opportunity, and JeJu was glad to be present. Tanaka Kenzo was in a bout with Ma Dong-wook. Kenzo had already assessed Ma Dong-wook and Baek from their earlier fight, but had a nagging feeling that Baek was concealing something. On the other side, a 4-on-4 match seemed to imply that Tawata Kanae's opponent will be Cha Hae-in. Tae-gyu seemed hopeful that their opponents would take it easy on them, while Dong-wook announced the start of the match. Dong-wook's ability to grow bigger indicated his preference for strength battles, a straightforward approach that Kenzo found commendable. As the sparring began, the room filled with tension. Tae-gyu noted his opponent's speed, deducing that close quarters combat would put him at a disadvantage. His specialty was creating distance and attacking from afar, a strategy he promptly adopted by launching a magic arrow. Gun-hee, observing, remarked on the fortification of the facility, noting that it had been made using high-quality essence stones. Average hunters would struggle to damage the walls, yet the place was already wrecked in mere seconds. He lamented the necessity of sending young hunters into battle against some of the world's most powerful S-ranks, and resolved to be prepared for anything, even if it meant breaking the opponent's wrists if needed. Kumamoto observed Baek seemed to be wasting his energy. He lunged at Baek, not adhering to any specific rules, operating instead by the principle of survival of the fittest. Baek noted Kumamoto's intent to kill, but wondered why he hesitated, speculating whether Kumamoto might be scared. Kumamoto, meanwhile, doubted his own suitability as a hunter. Baek, contemplating Kumamoto's behavior, couldn't decide whether the man had great judgment or was simply a coward. Baek realized Goto's motives seemed clear. He wanted to test their strength, possibly in preparation for fighting the ants. This realization stirred something within him. prompting Bake to decide it was time to show a glimpse of his true strength. His demeanor shifted noticeably, and a fierce determination settled in his eyes. The intensity of his gaze was so powerful that it struck fear into his opponent, Kumamoto, who suddenly felt overwhelmed by a deep sense of dread. Kumamoto's confidence wavered, and he was gripped by the desire to escape the confrontation altogether. Without hesitation, Bake surged forward with incredible speed, his sharp claws aimed directly at Kumamoto. As the match progressed, Jung-soo and his associate marveled at the monstrous power levels present, realizing their earlier matches were mere child's play in comparison. The sparring sessions yielded decisive outcomes. Tanaka Kenzo defeated Madong.
Come on, I was expecting a lot more damage from this guy. Like, when he was sparring with the other guy, it looked like he was holding his own, but man, he was the first one that got beat. How they gonna go and fight the ants?
With the latter laughing off his unexpected defeat, while Hoshino Minoru overcame Lim Taegyu. Bake prepared for his turn, feeling underestimated compared to Heian. Tawada, sparring with Heian, struggled to keep up with her unpredictable movements. Heian's nickname, the Dancer, reflected her swift, deadly efficiency, a name she found embarrassing and had therefore discouraged its use. Heian deftly dodged Tawada's attacks and tapped her out of the sparring match, quickly moving to assist Bake, who was facing two opponents. As she tried to intervene, Kumamoto attempted a sneak attack, but Heian responded with blinding speed, landing a flurry of punches that left observers in awe. They couldn't believe how many times she hit him in the blink of an eye. Heian realized her excessive instinctive response, while observers noted that Kumamoto lost control when angry, becoming irrational and dangerous. Despite his capability of clearing a B-rank gate alone, Goto, overseeing the test, ordered his team to let Kumamoto be for now, prepared to intervene if necessary. As Kumamoto prepared to attack Heian again, JeJu intervened, cautioning that they were getting too carried away in what was supposed to be a
He said, "Don't touch my girl, bro. Don't touch my girl."
sparring session. Kumamoto, enraged, tried to grab JeJu, only to be slammed to the ground. Goto, puzzled by JeJu's movements, questioned if JeJu was truly a mage-type hunter, to which Hanekawa confirmed based on official statements. JeJu suggested calling the match a loss for the South Korean hunters, and Heian agreed. Acknowledging the overwhelming strength of the Japanese hunters, Bake conceded that even transforming wouldn't have made a difference, accepting their defeat gracefully. Goto approached JeJu with a direct request for a one-on-one fight. His expression was intense, his eyes fixed on JeJu, and he spoke through a translator. JeJu listened as the translator relayed Goto's request. It was clear that Goto wanted to see what JeJu could do. JeJu looked at Goto, trying to discern his true intentions. Goto was renowned and wasn't interested in merely showing off his skills. If he wanted to flaunt his abilities, he would have challenged one of the top Korean guild leaders. Instead, he seemed genuinely interested in JeJu. JeJu wasn't opposed to the idea of a fight. He was eager to test the skills he had honed in the Demon's Castle and curious about the abilities of Japan's best hunter. JeJu could see that Goto was curious about his abilities as well. However, Goto was surprised when he saw JeJu's relaxed demeanor. JeJu spoke to the translator, who seemed hesitant but eventually conveyed JeJu's response to Goto. The translator informed Goto that JeJu accepted the challenge but had a condition. Goto was puzzled by this and wanted to know what the condition was. The translator explained that JeJu would accept the fight only if Goto intended to give it his all. This condition took Goto by surprise. He had expected JeJu to be hesitant, but instead, JeJu was making demands. Goto observed the situation with a sense of amusement, finding the unfolding events rather entertaining. He knew they had a valuable asset in Shimizu, an S-rank healer. With Shimizu's abilities, any injuries they might sustain in the upcoming moments wouldn't pose a serious threat. Goto instructed Shimizu to be prepared, ensuring that anyone injured would receive immediate assistance, including JeJu, as he would be needing her help in a few minutes. Onlookers comprising other S-rank hunters and association employees gathered around JeJu and Mr. Goto. They were a mix of excitement and concern. Among them was Heian, deeply worried for JeJu's safety. However, she remembered how JeJu had fought an A-ranked dungeon boss and over 100 high orcs. This memory made her heart race and her anticipation soar, preventing her from stepping in. Bake, who had done several raids with Heian in the past and was aware of her condition, stood next to her. He acknowledged her struggle with a nod when she mentioned that she couldn't avoid other hunters forever, especially on JeJu Island. when Heian inquired his connection with JeJu and wondered why he wasn't trying to dissuade JeJu from accepting such a dangerous fight. Under normal circumstances, Baek might have done so, but this was no ordinary situation. JeJu's opponent was none other than Goto Ryuji, a formidable S-rank hunter. Heian couldn't understand why Baek wasn't more worried, so she pressed him for an answer. To her surprise, Baek revealed that he shared the same reason as she did for not stepping in. This statement caught Heian off guard. Usually calm and composed, she was surprised by how well Baek understood her feelings. Despite her concern, she couldn't ignore the thrill that had gripped her, the thought that maybe, just maybe, JeJu could achieve the impossible. Baek smiled, his eyes sparkling with anticipation as he turned his attention back to JeJu and Mr. Goto. He shared Heian's excitement and belief that JeJu might be an awakened being with growing abilities. Finally, the moment of truth arrived, but before JeJu could fully prepare, Goto attacked. Goto swung at the space where JeJu's head had been. He was shocked to find he missed. His attempt to knock JeJu out with a single punch had failed because JeJu had dodged and put some distance between them. JeJu's reaction time was remarkable for someone considered a mage hunter. Goto couldn't believe his eyes. It seemed impossible that JeJu moved with such speed and silence. He must be an assassin-class hunter. Goto was determined to expose JeJu's true abilities and was excited by the challenge. Meanwhile, JeJu stood far enough from Goto, listening to his heartbeat. His heart pounded, but instead of fear, he felt a surge of confidence. Goto's strength was on a different level from other S-rank hunters, yet JeJu felt assured, realizing how much he had improved by leveling up to 97. His confidence was evident on his face. Goto's expression hardened when he saw JeJu smiling. Annoyed, Goto released an incredible amount of mana, making the onlookers shudder. They began to worry about the seriousness of the sparring. The spectators were captivated by Goto's fierce offense and JeJu's evasive maneuvers. They were amazed that JeJu was holding his own, but Heian knew better. JeJu wasn't just holding his own, he was goading Goto into attacking. As Jungin returned from his break, he noticed an intense match had begun in his absence. The atmosphere was charged, and it was clear that the sparring between JeJu and Goto Ryuji had taken a serious turn. Goto, realizing that JeJu was no ordinary opponent, felt the need to unleash his full strength. His frustration boiled over, and he decided that holding back was no longer an option. With murderous intent, Goto resolved to kill JeJu. At that moment, JeJu received a system notification warning him of the imminent danger. The system alerted him to the murderous intent coming from someone nearby, heightening his awareness. Goto, consumed by rage, launched a powerful and precise attack aimed at JeJu. His sharp nails grazed JeJu's cheek, narrowly missing his eye. Instinctively, JeJu grabbed Goto's hand, stopping the attack. As JeJu held Goto's hand, he realized the seriousness of the situation. He knew that if he continued to treat this as a simple sparring match, it could escalate into something far more dangerous. Memories of past encounters with Hwang Dong-suk and Kang Taishik flashed through his mind, reminding him of the system's urgent quests that had pushed him to the brink. The near miss with Goto's attack made him realize just how close he had come to losing an eye. Goto, on the other hand, was shocked by JeJu's strength. He couldn't comprehend how JeJu was so powerful, and the fact that JeJu had deliberately grabbed his hand instead of his wrist only added to his confusion. JeJu, with a smirk, acknowledged Goto's confusion and hinted that the fight could have ended differently if he had chosen to grab Goto's wrist instead. Both men stared at each other, the tension between
Bro, he wasn't even trying.
them building as they prepared to turn their sparring into a real battle. However, before they could escalate further, Baek and Heian intervened. Baek grabbed JeJu's shoulder while Heian held onto his wrist with all her strength, restraining him. On the other side, Hoshino Minoru pulled Goto back while Kei cast an ice spell to create a wall of ice between them, preventing the situation from spiraling out of control. JeJu looked over his shoulder to see Baek reminding him that Goto was responsible for leading the Japanese team in a few days, and Heian pointed out the severe consequences if anything happened to him. Their intervention helped JeJu regain his composure, and Baek suggested ending the sparring session. Recognizing that it had gone too far, Hanekawa agreed, and with the tension diffused, the match was called off. Baek asked JeJu if he had overstepped his boundaries by intervening, but JeJu reassured him.
All right, bro. See you, Thomas. Thanks. And yeah, definitely check it out. It's called Solo Leveling.
him that he had not. As the onlookers approached, their regard for JeJu had changed. Dong-wook, the guild master of the famed guild, was the first to reach him, praising JeJu for sparring with Goto and emerging with only a scratch. Admiring JeJu's muscles, Dong-wook invited him to join the famed guild, only to be corrected by Jong-in that JeJu was actually a mage class. Dong-wook was surprised by this revelation. As JeJu reflected on the encounter, he realized that he had gained valuable insight into the strength of everyone around him. Yet, despite their abilities, none of them had noticed the soldiers hiding in JeJu's shadow. Even Goto Ryuji, with all his power, hadn't sensed anything out of place. President Go approached JeJu, who informed him of his decision not to participate in the upcoming raid. Gun-hee was taken aback by this unexpected response. Meanwhile, Goto assessed his own condition. Despite the cold weather, sweat was beading on his forehead. At the White Tiger Guild, Baek took a deep breath. His heart was still racing even after JeJu and Goto had left the gymnasium. He couldn't believe what he had just witnessed. Seeing someone who could actually increase their abilities through reawakening was astonishing. The concept had been a mere theory to him until now. He pondered JeJu's potential net worth, realizing it was beyond his ability to estimate. Recruiting JeJu seemed impossible, but Baek knew there were other ways to maintain a working relationship without formal recruitment. Just then, his cell phone vibrated, indicating the arrival of a text message. Distractedly, he pulled his phone from his pocket. It was a notice from the association announcing the final list of hunters for the ant extermination mission in 4 days. Baek scrolled past the Japanese names to check the list of Korean hunters. His eyes widened in shock, and he sprang up from the bench. There's no Sung JeJu.
Bro, he's so scared. He's like, bro, that wasn't nothing without him. Man, I feel like something bad's gonna happen. This is what this is where it ended last weekend on the anime. So this is all like new territory.
Elsewhere, Goto took out his phone and called a familiar number. Vice Guild Master Shigeo Matsumoto answered. Goto, trying to steady his voice, informed him about an incredible hunter in Korea, possibly better than himself. Matsumoto was skeptical, but asked for the hunter's name. Goto mentioned JeJu Sung, the recently reawakened S-rank. Matsumoto, however, found it strange as there was no such name on the finalized roster of Korean hunters. Goto was confused and questioned this discrepancy. Matsumoto read off the list of Korean team members: Jong-in, Dong-wook, Baek, Hae-in, Tae-gyu, and Byung-gyu, trying to assure Goto that everything would be fine. This left Goto bewildered and questioning what he had just experienced. At Hala-sen, Baingnuk-dam, a crater lake perched atop Mount Hala, the dire situation of the ant colony reached a critical point. The once thriving ant kingdom faced starvation, with their children resorting to cannibalism due to the severe lack of food. The queen of the ants recognized that the island could no longer sustain their population and understood the necessity for a drastic change. The queen realized they needed a stronger soldier, an all-powerful leader to guide the citizens of their kingdom. This soldier would need to inspire fear in their enemies to ensure the survival of the colony. The queen's resolve solidified as she repeated her command: they must become stronger. The future of their kingdom depended on it. She urged her children to consume everything available and grow stronger, knowing that this was their only chance for survival. In response to her plea, a new powerful entity emerged from the depths of the colony with a deafening screech, signifying the dawn of a formidable force. This new leader would be their hope, their shield, and their sword in the battle for survival.
Let's go.
Meanwhile, JeJu had brought his mother Kyung-ye home after her discharge from the hospital. When they opened the apartment door, they were greeted by the huge mess Gina had made in the living room while JeJu was inside the demon's castle. JeJu pinched Gina's cheek as Kyung-ye laughed and scolded him. I think the first thing she would do after 4 years was clean the apartment. JeJu had tried to stop her, but when she insisted, the children rolled up their sleeves as well. Their faces glowed as the apartment itself began to shine. It had seemed empty without their mother, but...
Bro, I wonder how many the King Ant's gonna kill for the on the live. How many S rankers are gonna fall down?
But now the place felt cozy. JeJu slept comfortably without any worries for the first time in a long while. When he woke up the next morning, his mother was already up. She asked him about any news regarding his father while she was asleep. JeJu shook his head. This thought weighed on him as he pondered what she would say if she knew he had followed in his father's footsteps and become a hunter. His father was the reason she didn't want to leave their old apartment. Despite JeJu having made more money than most people would see in a lifetime, they still stayed there, paying rent every month. His father had gone missing years ago, yet she held on to the hope that he would return one day. His thoughts trailed off as he watched his mother. JeJu understood the depth of her hope and the pain that came with it. The Jeju Island raid was important, but not as important as his family. For now, being with his mother and sister was his priority. The story went viral. South Korea and Japan joined hands to exterminate magic beasts that turned Jeju Island into a wasteland. An expert on TV was shedding light on the situation, explaining that the magic beast ants were evolving at an incredible rate. The show then displayed the magic beast that had caused significant damage in Japan. The ant looked even more human and had large wings sprouting from its back. The audience was shocked, and a comedian on the panel blurted out, "And that thing can fly." The expert confirmed this, explaining that it was the catalyst for the Korea-Japan alliance. However, the public's reaction was less understanding. People questioned why JeJu's name wasn't on the Korean list for the mission. They doubted his abilities, mocking him as a coward, despite his new S-rank status. This criticism annoyed JeJu, but he was more concerned about his sister, Gina, who seemed to keep an eye on such things. While scrolling through social media, JeJu's phone rang. The caller ID showed it was Jinho. Jinho excitedly informed JeJu that he had recently moved out of the motel and found his own place. He then eagerly asked JeJu to check out a new office space he had found for their guild headquarters. JeJu's curiosity was piqued when Jinho called, asking him to check out a potential office space for their new guild headquarters. Upon arriving at the office, he immediately understood why Jinho had sounded so confident. Jinho, clearly proud of his choice, explained that having an office was essential for forming a guild. He had carefully selected the best option among the buildings close to JeJu's apartment, making sure it was convenient and suitable for their needs. JeJu, however, couldn't help but notice the size of the office. It seemed far too large for just the two of them. Jinho, ever the planner, reminded JeJu that they needed at least 3 people to officially establish a guild. This meant JeJu would have to recruit one more person to meet the requirements. As JeJu considered this, he thought about the hunters he knew, realizing he could easily pick someone he trusted to fill the head count. At that moment, Jinho mentioned that someone had been looking for JeJu, a foreigner who spoke English. Jinho handed JeJu a note with a cell phone number and a hotel room number. They'd be in Korea until the 17th of July. This intrigued JeJu as it meant someone had gone through Jinho to reach him, even though their public association was minimal. As JeJu pondered the situation, he sensed something was wrong and needed to head back home. Using his shadow exchange ability, he vanished from the spot, leaving a shadow behind. Jinho, left alone, was scared out of his wits. At that time of day, every alleyway was blanketed in darkness. In one such alley, a university student forced out a cry for help as a knife was held to her throat. The killer, with madness in his eyes, threatened her, relishing in the fear he instilled. He mocked her, telling her that several people had been murdered in that very spot, and this was why he loved the neighborhood. The girl, terrified and pleading for her life, could barely speak. Suddenly, JeJu arrived at the scene. He calmly observed the situation, a voice emerging from the shadows. He made a comment about loving the neighborhood too, catching the killer off guard. Curious, JeJu inquired why the killer was doing this. The killer turned towards JeJu, dismissing the need for reasons and admitting he did it because it was fun. He then lunged at JeJu with a knife in hand, attempting to overpower him. JeJu, unfazed, defended himself with ease. The killer boasted about his urge to harass those weaker than himself, but JeJu cut him off, saying he could somewhat relate. Beads of sweat formed on the killer's forehead as JeJu slashed him with his dagger on his thighs and ankles. The killer screamed in pain, collapsing to the ground. JeJu remarked that it would have been nice to go home before it got so dark. The girl, seizing the opportunity, ran away from the scene. JeJu then instructed the killer to turn himself in before midnight if he wanted to live. As a precaution, JeJu left a high-level orc shadow soldier behind to guard the killer. He told the shadow soldier to kill the man if he didn't turn himself in before midnight. On his way home, he noticed the moon high in the sky and remembered that the Korea-Japan alliance mission was the next day. JeJu wasn't part of the team, but his heart raced as he thought about the mission. He hoped for the safe return of the S-rank hunters he was acquainted with. The next day, as the helicopter carrying the hunters flew toward JeJu Island, Goto found himself unable to shake off the lingering impact of his encounter with JeNu. The tension weighed heavily on his shoulders, making him feel suffocated, and thoughts of death crept into his mind, filling him with a bitter sense of unease. Desperately, he shook his head to clear those dark thoughts, trying to refocus on the task ahead. He reminded himself that it didn't matter, but the encounter with JeNu had left a mark that was difficult to ignore. Meanwhile, off the coast of China and Taiwan, battleships sailed in the ocean, ready for action. Near JeJu Island, a formidable fleet was deployed. Jiangsu, the leader of the Knights Guild, reminded his team to brace themselves. He knew the ants might have caught on to their presence and could attack at any moment. One of his associates voiced concerns about whether their strategy would work on the ants. Jiangsu admitted that they wouldn't know until they tried, but their job was to stand guard and kill any ants that flew their way, preventing them from reaching the mainland. Jiangsu's associate, Jung Yun Tai, expressed his unwavering loyalty, ready to follow Jiangsu to the ends of the earth. In the Fame Guild, the atmosphere was tense. Their task was to stand guard and be ready for any ant attacks. Despite the heavy responsibility, the Vice Guild Master of Fame Guild noted that there wasn't much to do at the moment. They were the defense team, but in reality, they were on standby. Dongwook suggested running through some tactical drills with the guild members. The Vice Guild Master, however, felt that her title was mostly symbolic and downplayed her role. Dongwook acknowledged the Vice Guild Master's contributions to the guild, thanking her for her excellent management and the expansion of their activities. Despite his gratitude, the Vice Guild Master was anxious about sending Dongwook into battle, urging him to return safely. In the Fiend Guild, Taigyu was furious about the deployment of Minsung, a valuable member, to a dangerous position. He demanded that Minsung be moved to the back, as far away from the ants as possible. Realizing that the troops were already deployed and couldn't be recalled, he instructed Minsung to find cover and stay hidden. At the request of the Hunters Association, the hunters from each guild were deployed to the south of the island. The Hunters Guild, White Tiger Guild, and Fame Guild were all stationed there as a precaution. Even if the raid succeeded, there was still a risk that the remaining mutant ants would invade the mainland. To bolster their numbers, retired hunters and individuals who had awakened but chose not to become hunters joined the fight. There were 5,000 of these individuals, meaning that 1/10 of the 50,000 awakened beings in South Korea had joined the effort. As the helicopter approached JeJu Island, the hunters prepared themselves for the imminent battle, knowing the stakes were high. Among them was a cameraman from a news agency that specialized in reporting about hunters. His job was to film hunters in action, and this raid was going to be broadcast live nationwide. However, there would be a 10-minute delay before the footage went on air, allowing the editing team to filter out any sensitive content. Bake found it hard to believe that a cameraman was accompanying them on such a dangerous mission. He wondered what their leader, Mr. Go, was thinking. Dongwook reassured everyone, saying that a truly successful hunter is one who has someone to protect. He advised the cameraman to take care of himself. The cameraman, despite being an A-rank hunter, trembled with nerves. He explained that many awakened individuals, like him, chose to live normal lives despite having a hunter's license. This wasn't his first time going to a dangerous filming location, having covered a few dungeons breaks before, but he was unsure how helpful his past experiences would be this time around. Dongwook encouraged him, saying that the Hunters Association probably allowed a cameraman to join them because they believed this fourth raid had a good chance of succeeding. The cameraman expressed his gratitude, while Dongwook noted that this would be the first and last time civilians would witness an S-rank raid. Given their previous 3 failures on JeJu Island, everyone would be eagerly watching. Bake was determined to show them a clean victory, though he knew that failing this mission could mean the end of South Korea. The world was in dire need of heroes at this moment. Bake, trying to shake off the nerves, struck a conversation with his close friend Byungju. The lone S-rank healer in Korea had joined the raid despite being retired. His presence was a huge relief to everyone, as having a healer meant that they could fight without worrying about injuries. Bake and Byungju's conversation lightened the heavy atmosphere, prompting Hae-in to ask Bake if he had met with JeNu. Bake shook his head, saying he hadn't, and Hae-in dismissed it as a misunderstanding. Goto and his guild hunters were the first to reach JeJu Island. As they walked through the devastated landscape, they witnessed the massacre the ants had caused to the city. Goto noted that this used to be Jeju City, now a complete ghost town. Dead ants littered their path, and he observed that these corpses appeared to have been cannibalized by other ants, suggesting the presence of a predator among them. Goto, maintaining communication, requested a roll call. Each team responded promptly. Bravo, Charlie, and Delta, confirming their positions. With everyone accounted for, Goto ordered them to open the floodgates. In response, huge levels of mana exploded throughout the island, sending powerful waves of energy through the air. Baek and Jongin, observing the scene, remarked on the intensity of the mono waves. They concluded that the Japanese must have launched their operation. Suddenly, hundreds and thousands of ants began flying out of the mountain, swarming the sky. The sheer number of them was overwhelming, and the hunters braced themselves for the impending battle. As the mutant ants spotted the approaching helicopter, they reacted with startling speed, shooting up into the sky like black, menacing projectiles. Yongin, the lone mage hunter on the team, instinctively stepped forward, his mind already calculating the best approach to neutralize the danger. He knew that this was no ordinary confrontation. These ants had evolved, becoming more resilient and deadlier. Without hesitation, Jongin activated his special ability, Flame Spear. 7 blasts of fire materialized in the air, each one forming into a fiery javelin that trailed flames as they hurtled toward their targets. The fiery spears struck the ants with precision, igniting their wings. The once formidable creatures now spiraled helplessly to the ground, their bodies consumed by the flames. Despite this success, Jongin's expression remained serious. He knew that this was only the beginning. As impressive as the attack had been, it hadn't been enough to guarantee the ants' defeat. His flame spear, effective though it was, had merely disabled them by burning their wings, but he hadn't completely eradicated the threat. Jongin prepared another spell, his focus intensifying. With a deep breath, he channeled his mana into a more powerful attack, a blazing inferno that roared to life in his hands. He launched the fiery spell into the sky, where it exploded in a brilliant burst of flames. Yongin watched as the last of the ants fell, their charred remains scattering across the ground. Satisfied that he had dealt with the immediate threat, Jongin didn't hesitate to take things further. He jumped out of the helicopter, landing on the scorched earth of JeJu Island with a determined stride. The battlefield was a smoldering ruin, the ground blackened and cracked from the intense heat of his magic. Jongin walked through the aftermath, his steps deliberate and measured. He launched another powerful blast, this time aiming at a group of ants that had begun to emerge from their hiding places. The blast roared across the battlefield, the flames consuming everything in their path. The ants, once a terrifying swarm, were now nothing more than ashes. As the flames flickered out, Jongin allowed himself a moment of reflection. The scene brought back memories of his childhood, of the times he had played with ants as a boy. He remembered how he had used a lighter to torch them, the faint snapping noises their bodies made as they burned. Now, as he stood amidst the blazing ruins, the destruction he had wrought was on an entirely different scale. The ants didn't just snap and crackle. They exploded like fireworks, their bodies disintegrating in the face of his overwhelming power. With a satisfied smirk, he signaled to the others that it was safe to descend. The battlefield was his, and any threat had been effectively neutralized. Dongwook grasped the gravity of the situation. Unlike previous attempts, there would be no escape route this time. They could very well end up trapped inside the ant tunnels if they failed. The Japanese hunters were buying them time, but they only had an hour to defeat the queen. It was a do-or-die mission, and they needed to be focused and efficient. After allowing everyone a moment to steel themselves, Dongwook gave the signal. It was time. 7 hunters, the 6 strike squad members, along with the cameraman who had bravely joined them, jumped out of the helicopter, their hearts and minds focused on the task ahead. The battle for JeJu Island had officially begun, and they were ready to face whatever challenges lay in their path. The fate of their country, and perhaps the world, rested on their shoulders. The operation to take down the ants on JeJu Island was in full swing. Destroyer number 2, the Kaga, sailed steadily amidst the ocean, cutting through the waves with purpose. Aboard the ship was Sugimoto of the Drawsword Guild, a seasoned hunter who was ready to play his part in the mission. As the ship neared its designated position, Sugimoto gave the order to commence their portion of the operation. With the jamming signals activated, the ants would no longer be able to hear the Queen's call for help. This critical move was designed to disrupt the communication between the Queen and her army, preventing the ants from mounting a coordinated defense. The jamming signals were crucial to ensuring the success of the mission, and Sugimoto knew that the fate of the entire operation hinged on their effectiveness. Elsewhere, the hunters of Team Bravo were facing their own challenges. Kumamoto, one of their members, struggled to adapt to the intensity of the battle. His teammates urged him to get it together, warning him that if he didn't adjust quickly, he would end up dead. The pressure of the mission was getting to everyone, and the stress of the situation was palpable. Team Charlie, meanwhile, was growing impatient. They found themselves surrounded by countless ants, and it seemed faster to kill them all themselves rather than wait for the South Korean team to take down the queen. Among them, Kenzo was off on his own, playing a twisted game with the ants. He was snapping off their wings one by one, taking a perverse pleasure in their helplessness. His teammates could only shake their heads, bemused by his antics. Team Delta kept a close eye on the situation unfolding near the ant tunnels. They watched as fireworks of magic erupted in the distance, a clear sign that Choi Jong-in was in action. The Korean mage hunter was known for his powerful fire magic, and the explosions marked his progress as he fought his way through the ant-infested tunnels. One of the Delta hunters couldn't help but wonder what would happen if he were to face off against Jong-in. It would be a battle of ice and fire, a clash of opposites that could yield unpredictable results. The Korean hunters soon arrived at Bangnagdam, a place that was once famous for its natural beauty, but now it was nothing more than a wasteland consumed by the ants and their relentless expansion. Jong-in, ever practical, pointed out that the area had been reduced to nothing but an ant colony. His voice carried a note of grim determination as he prepared to lead the team further into the depths of the tunnel. To protect the group from the lower-ranked ants, Jong-in cast a powerful spell, Flame Prison, not as an offensive weapon but as a shield. The magical barrier would keep any ants ranked B or lower from entering their space, providing a temporary respite as they navigated the labyrinthine tunnels. With a small flame lit in his hand, Jong-in took the lead, cutting through the mana-laden darkness with his powerful magic. The glow of his flame illuminated the narrow path ahead, giving the hunters a sense of direction in the otherwise disorienting darkness. As they moved deeper, Bates felt a surge of apprehension. Jong-in, however, remained calm and focused. He used his fireballs not just as a weapon, but as a tool to explore the tunnels, blasting them down different paths to see which ones loop back on themselves. It was a methodical process, and eventually he found what they were looking for, a deep tunnel that showed no signs of explosion. This was the path that would lead them to the queen. Bait couldn't help but feel a sense of reassurance having Jong-in on their team. The mage hunter's competence and calm under pressure were exactly what they needed in such a dangerous situation. With the path now clear, Jong-in gave the signal and the team steeled themselves for the final leg of their journey. As JeJu came to a stop, a familiar sound rang in his ears, a soft chime that signaled the completion of his daily quest. Unlike the first time he had attempted this routine, he wasn't even slightly winded. What had once been a challenging task was now a part of his everyday life. As he looked around, JeJu noticed something unusual. The area, typically quiet, was now completely deserted. There wasn't a single person in sight. It was an odd occurrence, even for a place that was generally empty. His thoughts drifted to the ongoing JeJu Island raid. Perhaps the broadcast of the raid had started, and everyone was glued to their screens, watching the events unfold. The South Korean and Japanese S-rank hunters participating in the raid were among the strongest in the world. JeJu had no doubt about their abilities. He didn't feel the need to watch the broadcast himself. Even without his presence, he knew that the combined strength of those hunters would be more than enough to successfully complete the mission. As long as everything went according to plan, the raid would be a success. JeJu reassured himself of this as he stood alone. As Taegyu's arrow pierced through one of the ants, the hunters observed that only a few ants had stayed behind, while the rest had seemingly left the tunnels. Jong-in noted that their prediction had been accurate. Most of the ants had indeed vacated the area, leaving behind only a few to guard the tunnels. Taegyu, examining the defeated ants, realized that this was his first encounter with these particular creatures. He speculated that they might have been the Queen's royal guards, though he found them to be quite weak. Their eyes were deteriorated, a sign that these ants had likely evolved to better guard the dark tunnels. This evolution, while making them more suited to their environment, had also made them easier to defeat. If these ants weren't the true royal guards, then the hunters could proceed with confidence, using their firepower to breeze through the remaining obstacles. Byung-ju expressed doubt, wondering if the queen might have betrayed her own subjects and fled. However, Bake dismissed this idea as impossible. They were, after all, just ants, and being on an island, there was nowhere for the queen to escape to. The cameraman, struggling with the darkness of the tunnels, wondered if his camera was capturing the footage properly. He reassured himself that the staff at headquarters would do a good job of editing whatever he managed to record. As the Korean hunters ventured deeper into the cave, they encountered surprisingly little resistance. The inside of the ant colony resembled other cave-type dungeons they had explored before, with one significant difference. There were no glowing stones to light their way. Jong-in, holding
Sorry, I haven't talked in a while. I've been getting really into it.
the flame in his hand, led the group through the dark tunnels, the others sticking closely
I can't wait for this to be animated. I'm not even gonna lie.
behind him. Suddenly, Jong-in spotted something ahead. The group halted as they came across a disturbing sight. Countless ant eggs covered the walls and ceiling as far as the eye could see. Through the translucent shells, they could see
Look at that. How many ants is that? It's
black
thousands.
larvae writhing inside. The scene filled the hunters with disgust as they stood amidst the dreary, moldy-smelling spawning ground. Jong-in, realizing what they had discovered, understood that the presence of a spawning ground meant that the queen's chamber was likely nearby. The ants they had encountered earlier must have been stationed to protect these eggs. Without hesitation, Jong-in prepared to set the entire area on fire. As they surveyed the eggs, Haeun's eyes were drawn to one in particular, a large egg that had already hatched. It stood out from the rest due to its enormous size. Byung-yu, bewildered, wondered aloud what could have hatched from such a massive egg. Could it have been a royal guard? The uncertainty lingered, but Bake quickly refocused the group. Their primary goal was to defeat the queen, and everything else was secondary. Bake, though outwardly composed, understood Byung-yu's shock. The situation was unnerving, but they couldn't afford to be distracted. Their mission was clear, and they needed to keep their focus on the task at hand. Team Charlie, consisting of skilled hunters from Japan, found themselves in a dire situation. Shimizu and Kenzo were in the midst of a light exchange. Kenzo had just fought off a group of flying ants, creatures far more challenging than he had anticipated. The ants had attacked using organized military tactics, flying in battle formations that made them difficult to counter. Despite killing around 30 of them, Kenzo had been injured in the shoulder and waist. Shimizu, noticing Kenzo's condition, offered to heal him, but with a catch. She hinted at wanting something in return, though it wasn't money this time. Kenzo, slightly irritated, urged her to stop playing around and heal him, pointing out that she was already wealthy and still so young. Despite the banter, Kenzo's attention remained sharp, and he soon noticed more ants approaching their position. He urged Shimizu to hurry, sensing the imminent danger. Before Shimizu could respond or reveal what she wanted from Kenzo, disaster struck.
Oh, snap! What? She got taken out that easily? What?
An instant, her head was severed from her body with terrifying speed. Blood splattered across the battlefield.
Look, she didn't even feel that, yo. That's crazy.
As her lifeless body collapsed, the sudden and brutal attack left Kenzo and Tatsumi in shock, unable to comprehend what had just happened. The unidentified assailant moved with such blinding speed that it was nearly impossible to react. Kenzo, trying to warn Tatsumi, barely got the words out before he too met a gruesome end. His head was crushed in a blur of motion.
Bro, this thing just took out 2 S ranks like nothing, yo. That's crazy. What's beyond S rank? Is it like
blood splashing everywhere as his body fell lifelessly to the ground? Tatsumi, fueled by rage and desperation, charged at the unseen beast, but his fate was sealed as well. As soon as he dashed forward, he was swiftly slashed down, joining his fallen.
Bro, he just unalived like 3 people without even trying, and all like headshots. That's crazy.
Comrades in death. The aftermath was a gruesome scene. The bodies of Team Charlie's hunters lay scattered on the ground, mingled with the corpses of the ants they had fought so valiantly against. The once formidable team had been wiped out in moments. Dong-wook, standing tall behind his massive shield, braced himself as the sound of scuttling feet echoed through the tunnels. The ants appeared, their vestigial eyes, like those of the other creatures born on JeJu Island, focused on the hunters. These were no ordinary ants. They were the Queen's royal guards, each one as powerful as an S-rank hunter. Dongwook knew they were formidable, but he also understood their limitations. Unlike hunters who employed a variety of battle tactics, these beasts were confined to instinctual movements. With a powerful thrust, Dongwook used his shield to block the incoming attacks from the ants, and without hesitation he called for Heian. She responded swiftly, leaping into the air with grace and precision. Her sword gleamed as she drove it into the head of one of the ants, pushing it deep into its body with the strength of her legs. The ant's body fluid splattered everywhere, but Heian didn't pause. She moved on to the next ant, her blade slashing through its tough exoskeleton with skill and determination. Heian noted the surprising resilience of the ants' bodies, which were tougher than she had anticipated. Dongwook, standing his ground, acknowledged that these royal guards were indeed different from the regular ants they had encountered before. He was relieved that their numbers were not overwhelming. JeJu, stepping up to support his comrades, joined the fray with confidence, smashing one of the ants' skulls into the ground with his mace. However, he reminded the group,
but isn't this that's a healer, right?
that even with crushed skulls, these ants could remain alive for a while. To ensure they were defeated, their limbs needed to be severed or they had to be finished off decisively. Bake, observing the situation, speculated that these royal guards might be from an older generation, possibly cast out due to being first-generation ants. If that were true, they could soon face a new wave of even more powerful second-generation guards. Byung-ju, understanding the gravity of the situation, suggested they prepare for the possibility. With that, he opened his spellbook and cast healing spells on the group, rejuvenating the hunters and giving them a newfound strength. They felt invigorated, their bodies coursing with energy. The hunters, now fully healed and refreshed, felt as if they could take on a group of beasts and emerge victorious. As more ants emerged from the shadows, their glowing red eyes piercing through the darkness, the hunters prepared for the next wave of attacks. The battle-hardened group knew they were more than capable of handling the oncoming horde. After losing contact with Team Charlie, Izawa and Kei, members of Team Delta, rushed to their last known location. The urgency of the situation weighed heavily on them as they sped through the dense forest, each step filled with a growing sense of dread. Izawa, frustrated by the lack of communication, muttered to himself about the situation, wondering what could have gone wrong. Upon arriving at the site, Izawa took in the surroundings. The signs of a recent battle were evident: scattered debris, broken tree branches, and the unmistakable marks left by the ants. It seemed that Team Charlie had engaged in a fierce fight, and judging by the aftermath, they had managed to defeat the ants. But something was wrong. There was no sign of the team itself. As Izawa searched the area, his eyes fell upon a familiar object lying on the ground, Fujishima's glasses. A sense of dread washed over him as he realized what it meant. His thoughts raced, trying to make sense of the situation, but the reality was too much to bear. Izawa's heart sank as he followed the trail of destruction, leading him to the lifeless bodies of his comrades. The sight was horrific, and he struggled to process what he was seeing. It was impossible to believe that such powerful hunters had been taken down so brutally. Kei, standing a few feet away, began to tremble. She felt a nauseating wave of energy wash over her, and an overpowering stench filled the air. Something rotten and foul, unlike anything she had ever encountered before. Unable to control her revulsion, Kei fell to her knees and vomited, the smell and the sight overwhelming her senses. Izawa rushed to her side, alarmed by her sudden reaction. But before he could do anything, a wave of red, glowing energy emerged from the bushes. The air seemed to crackle with malevolent force as the source of the energy drew closer. Kei, sensing the imminent danger, quickly unleashed her ice magic, creating a thick wall of ice around them for protection. But the barrier, though formidable, was no match for the unidentified beast that now approached. With terrifying speed and power, the creature pierced through the ice wall as if it were made of paper. The red energy enveloped the area, and in an instant everything turned into a nightmare. Blood splattered across the ground as the beast tore through the ice and into their bodies. The scene was gruesome, the violence swift and merciless. There was no time for defense, no chance for escape. The end of Delta Team was swift and brutal, marking yet another tragic chapter.
Bro, all the Japanese S-ranks got demolished
In the harrowing events on JeJu Island. The Korean team advanced deeper into the heart of the ant colony, finally entering the Queen's Den, the boss's lair of this treacherous dungeon. The atmosphere was thick with tension, every member acutely aware of the battle that lay ahead. The team had already faced numerous ants on their way in, and the toll of time weighed heavily on them, yet despite the challenges, they had moved swiftly, dispatching their enemies with impressive efficiency. As they stood in the dimly lit cavern, Bake took a moment to assess their progress. He couldn't help but be impressed by Hae-in's combat prowess. In the short span of time they had been fighting, she had likely eliminated twice as many ants as he had. Her speed and precision were unparalleled. Meanwhile, Dong-wook, ever the strategist, calculated their remaining time. They had taken 15 minutes to reach this point, meaning they had about 30 minutes left to complete the raid and retreat safely. Hae-in, sensitive to the smell, knew that their target was close and likely guarded by her most powerful soldiers. Bake, using his eyes of the beast, confirmed the situation. He could make out the exact number of enemies awaiting them. 8 royal guards stood between them and the queen, each one far stronger than the regular ants they had encountered so far. Dong-wook, understanding the gravity of the situation, made a quick decision. He would take on the queen directly, while Hae-in would handle the royal guards. The plan was simple, but required perfect execution. The queen's guards were as strong as S-rank hunters, making them formidable foes, but with Bake's diversion, the team had a chance to defeat them. As Dong-wook prepared to confront the queen, Jung-in took a proactive step, conjuring a massive glowing ball of mana and sending it to the highest point of the cavern. The radiant light filled the entire space, dispelling the darkness and giving the team a clear view of their enemies. Jung-in, usually careful with his mana, felt no need to hold back today. This battle was too crucial, and he was determined to use every bit of his power. Just as the tension mounted, one of the royal guards lunged at Jung-in from behind, its massive mandibles poised to strike. But before it could land a blow, an arrow whizzed through the air, striking the ant squarely and halting its attack. Lim, with his bow and arrow, had Jung-in's back, his aim precise and deadly. Meanwhile, Bake, embracing the intensity of the battle, transformed into his magic beast form.
Oh, he's going all out now, finally.
His body twisted and expanded into a hulking, monstrous figure. In this form, Bake felt no need to restrain his power. The hideous appearance didn't matter to him. All that...
Bro, I didn't know he did that. I remember they said that he transforms, but I didn't know.
Was exterminating every last one of these monstrous insects.
Let's go.
In his beast form, Bake unleashed his fury, charging at the royal guards with unmatched strength. He tore through them with his bare hands, the force of his blows causing their bodies to explode in a spray of fluids. The cavern echoed with the sound of his rampage, the ground trembling beneath his feet as he annihilated the queen's protectors. Hae-in, witnessing Bake's transformation and sheer power, acknowledged his ferocity. She had seen many powerful hunters in action, but Bake's beast form was something entirely different. His roar reverberated through the cavern, a primal sound that struck fear into the hearts of even the most seasoned warriors. Dong-wook, the main tank of the Korean team, swiftly took his position at the front line. He glanced over his shoulder to ensure the team was in sync. His eyes found Hae-in, who had been trailing behind him, ready for her part in the battle. At Dong-wook's signal, Cha Hae-in unsheathed her sword with a fluid motion. She gripped the weapon with both hands, its blade gleaming with a cold, deadly light. In one swift motion, she plunged the sword into the ground and activated her skill, Quake of Provocation. Immediately, waves of potent magic power rippled out from the sword, spreading through the air and compelling the queen's guards, who had been charging at Dong-wook, to suddenly turn their attention to her. It was as if they were possessed, their focus now solely on Hae-in. With the guards momentarily distracted, Dong-wook pressed forward. His task was clear. He had to keep the queen occupied, preventing her from interfering with the battle until all her guards had been eliminated. His shield was raised high, a formidable barrier between him and the monstrous queen. He called out, taunting the creature to focus on him. This was his role, to absorb the brunt of the queen's attacks while his teammates dealt with the guards. Meanwhile, the tension in the room was palpable, not just for the hunters, but also for the cameraman recording the battle. The cameraman, eager to capture every moment, was thrilled by the spike in viewership.
He's like, they don't pay me enough. He has a GoPro.
Ratings, which had just surpassed the 80% mark. He knew that a little more action could push those numbers even higher. Driven by the excitement, he started to move closer, hoping to get a better angle of the unfolding battle. However, Byung-gyu, ever the vigilant healer, quickly pulled the cameraman back. He reminded him of the grave danger they were in, standing in the boss's lair of an S-rank dungeon. There was no safety net here. The slightest mistake could cost them their lives. He warned the cameramen to stay behind, away from the deadly fray that was about to commence. Despite the common perception that healers were not skilled combatants, the cameraman couldn't help but be impressed by Byung-gyu. As an A-rank hunter himself, the cameraman felt a sense of respect towards Byung-gyu, realizing that the healer was a far more formidable fighter than he had initially thought. Back in Korea, an elderly man sat on the floor of his modest apartment, his face hidden behind the pages of a newspaper. The room was quiet, except for the soft sound of his wife bustling about. She glanced at the television, where a special broadcast was set to air, and then at her husband, who seemed determined to ignore it. The man's wife tried to engage him, knowing how important this moment was. But her efforts were met with indifference. Her husband had grown weary over the years, no longer interested in the hopeful words of reporters or the promises made by the hunters on TV. His heart, once filled with hope and passion, had hardened with disappointment and grief. Despite his disinterest, she couldn't help but think of their lost child, who had been taken from them by the very creatures the hunters were now fighting. The host announced that the hunters had entered the queen's chamber, confronting the largest ant ever witnessed by mankind. The scene was dire, with Dong-wook, the team's main tank, holding off the queen on his own, while the other hunters fought to eliminate the remaining guards. As the elderly woman watched, she could hear the sounds of excitement and support coming from the neighboring apartments. The entire building seemed to vibrate with the energy of those cheering for the hunters. The host's voice rose in excitement as he reported the progress of the battle. The hunters had successfully defeated half of the queen's guards, and only 2 remained. With each victory, the cheers from the building grew louder, a collective hope shared by everyone glued to their screens. Suddenly, the quiet of the apartment was shattered by the loud slam of a door. The elderly man, who had seemed so detached just moments ago, rushed out of the bedroom. His eyes were wide and filled with emotion, and he stared intently at the TV screen, his hands trembling. He understood the significance of this moment, the 4th attempt to rid their land of the ants that had caused so much suffering. The host continued to narrate the battle with growing excitement. The hunters had defeated all but the queen, and the final showdown was at hand. Once the queen fell, the hunters would be able to eliminate the rest of the ants. At the TV station, the atmosphere was electric. The executive director, who had been monitoring the ratings closely, was overwhelmed with joy when he learned that viewership had surpassed 85%. It was a historic moment, one that would be remembered for years to come. The success of the broadcast reflected the nation's collective hope and the importance of the battle being fought. The host declared that South Korea was on the verge of joining an elite group of countries that had cleared an S-rank gate, a list that included only the United States, China, Russia, and France.
Oh, man, I'm tired.
The team's tank took charge of the battle, shouting out commands to his fellow hunters. He urged them to close in on the queen, determined to keep her from reaching Haein, who was their key to victory. Lim, skilled in archery, didn't hesitate. He unleashed a flurry of arrows, each one finding its mark on the queen. The arrows embedded themselves into her tough exterior, making her look like a massive enraged porcupine. One particularly well-aimed arrow struck her square in the forehead, causing her to scream in pain and thrash about violently. Meanwhile, Bake saw his chance. With a powerful leap, he landed on the queen's back, his hands gripping one of her massive mandibles. With sheer brute force, he ripped it out, a testament to his incredible strength. He taunted the queen, declaring that without her guards, she was nothing more than a powerless figurehead. But the queen was not defeated yet. In a sudden, vicious move, she retaliated by spewing a cloud of poisonous acid, aiming to take down as many hunters as possible. The acid spread rapidly throughout the den, its corrosive power threatening to overwhelm them. However, Byung-gyu, the healer of the group, was quick to act. He moved swiftly, using his abilities to heal the blackened skin of his comrades, countering the queen's deadly attack. Frustrated that her poison...
Bro, these guys had like no self-preservation. If I see somebody spitting at me, I'm moving out of the way.
Was ineffective, the queen redirected her fury towards Byung-gyu, intending to eliminate the healer and cripple the team's chances of survival. But Dong-wook was ready. He positioned himself between the queen and Byung-gyu, raising his shield to block her path. As Dong-wook held his ground, Jong-in prepared his next move. He summoned a massive ball of flame and hurled it at the queen, the explosion lighting up the dungeon in a fiery blaze. The queen reeled from the impact, her body scorched by the powerful magic. Jong-in didn't stop there. He raised his hand again, preparing to unleash another blast of fiery magic. The dungeon echoed with the sound of his power. As he launched his attack, the flame flames engulfing the queen. Bake, observing the scene, felt confident. In his years of experience, he could tell that the queen was nearing her end. Victory seemed so close, he could almost taste it. But just as they thought they were about to win, the queen did something unexpected. She reared her head towards the sky and let out a piercing screech, a sound that echoed throughout the entire cave. It wasn't just a roar of pain.
Uh-oh. You know, she called.
Or a final cry. This was something different, a desperate call for help. The hunters froze, realizing that the queen was trying to summon something or someone. Outside the cave, chaos erupted. Sugimoto reported to Mr. Goto that the ants, which had been scattered and disoriented, were suddenly changing direction. They were no longer wandering aimlessly. Instead, they were heading straight for the tunnels. Panic set in as they realized that the jamming signals, which were supposed to keep the ants at bay, were no longer working. The ants were flying back to the cave, answering the queen's call. Goto was left in shock. He couldn't believe what was happening. The situation was spiraling out of control, and the hunters were now facing a threat far greater than they had anticipated. The queen had called for reinforcements, and the battle was about to take a deadly turn. As the queen continued with her roar, Heian prepared to make her next move. She leaped into the air with her sword. In one swift motion, she sliced through the queen's neck, and the massive head of the ant queen fell to the ground with a heavy thud. The sound echoed through the cavern as the battle seemed to come to a sudden and decisive end. Heian, landing lightly on her feet, looked around at her comrades. The adrenaline still pumped through her veins, but there was a sense of finality in the air. She asked,
You know what? It's easy like that. It's not really easy like that. I wonder what's gonna happen.
almost hesitantly, if it was truly over. The others, still catching their breath, looked at each other in disbelief. JeJu, always the one to voice what others were thinking, wondered aloud if they had indeed become the 7th team in the world to clear an S-rank gate. It was an incredible achievement, one that only a few could claim, but Bake, always attuned to the subtleties of the battlefield, felt something was off. His instincts, honed by countless battles, warned him that this victory might not be as complete as it seemed. Just as he was about to voice his concerns, Dong-wook interrupted with alarming news. The ants, which they thought had been defeated, or at least scattered, were now swarming toward them. There was no time to celebrate. They had to get out of the dungeon immediately. Heian, still trying to process what was happening, was taken aback. They had only just finished the fight, and now they were being told to flee? Taegyu, ever the strategist, noted that they still had time. How could things have gone so wrong so quickly? Byung-gyu, the team's healer, voiced the question on everyone's mind. Had the Japanese team failed to hold the ants back for even an hour? Dong-wook, though usually calm and composed, admitted he didn't know the details. The Hunters Association was investigating, but for now, all they knew was that something had gone terribly wrong. Zhang-in, their mage, mentioned something even more concerning. The flame prison he had cast over the entrance, a barrier of intense magical fire, had been destroyed. This was no small feat and indicated that whatever was coming for them was incredibly powerful. Bake came to a sudden stop. He froze, his eyes widening in disbelief as he stared at something ahead of him. The rest of the team, not understanding what had caused him to stop, began to pile up behind him. Byung-gyu was the first to notice Bake's trembling form. Something he could scarcely believe. In the dim light of the cave, a shadow emerged, growing larger as it approached. A powerful roar shattered the tense silence, reverberating through the tunnels with a force that shook the very ground they stood on. The sound was unlike anything they had ever heard, a deep primal noise that carried with it a sense of immense power and fury. Bake, his voice barely above a whisper, could hardly believe what he was sensing. The power emanating from whatever was ahead was unlike anything they had faced before. It wasn't just another magic beast. This was something far more dangerous. The realization hit him like a blow. This single creature possessed a level of power that rivaled or even surpassed that of the queen they had just defeated. As Heian watched the magic beast ant enter the den, a sense of dread washed over her. She felt a sudden surge of energy that made her drop to her knees, instinctively covering her nose as if to block out the oppressive aura it emitted. The sound of its footsteps echoed through the cavern, each step sending shivers down the spines of the hunters. The atmosphere grew tense as the creature approached, its movements unnervingly silent. Dong-wook knew they couldn't afford to waste any time, but as he debated their next move, an uneasy feeling gnawed at him. This wasn't just another magic beast. Something about it felt dangerously different. The creature moved with such speed that it was almost upon them before they realized it. It stood now in front of the dead queen, its attention solely focused on her lifeless form. Their hearts pounded in their chests and their breaths grew shallow.
Damn. You know it's about to get real right now. You just saw the queen die.
Aloe, this was no ordinary enemy. A cold sweat broke out on Dongwook's forehead. The ant seemed to ignore the hunters entirely, instead raising its head and unleashing a blood-curdling roar that shook the very walls of the cave. The sheer force of the sound was enough to knock the cameraman off his feet, and one by one, the hunters collapsed to their knees, overwhelmed by the pressure. When the creature's cry finally subsided, only Heian remained standing, though her legs trembled under the strain. The hope of a counterattack seemed almost impossible. The magic beast ant, now filled with hostility, turned its gaze toward the hunters, its face twisted in a horrifying expression of rage, fueled by the queen's death. Heian, sensing the danger, reached for her sword, but the creature was faster. Her fingers slowly moved towards the hilt of her sword, but before she could fully grasp it, the ant was already in motion. In an instant, the massive beast vanished from her sight, only to reappear behind her with terrifying speed. Heian barely had time to register what was happening, let alone defend herself. The creature's attack came with brutal force, striking her with a powerful blow to her side. The impact was immediate and devastating. The force of the blow sent Heian crashing
Wow, she got owned.
into a nearby wall, and she crumpled to the ground, her body racked with pain, filled from her mouth as the intensity of the injury overwhelmed her, and a scream of agony tore through her as she lay on the ground, helpless and battered. As Heian was knocked unconscious by a single powerful punch, Dongwook, the tank, was the first to react. Fueled by rage and determination, he charged forward with his shield, aiming to strike the magic beast ant. However, the creature was prepared. With a single devastating punch, it shattered Dongwook's shield, rendering it useless. The force of the blow left Dongwook vulnerable, and before he could recover, the ant gripped his hand with terrifying strength. In a swift and brutal motion, the ant tore Dongwook's right arm from his body. The pain was excruciating, and as blood poured from the wound, the ant flexed its body again, severing his other arm as well. Both of Dongwook's arms fell to the ground, leaving him armless and defenseless. Overwhelmed by the loss and shock, Dongwook stood trembling, blood
Wow, this ant is like 1v10.
still gushing from his grievous injuries. As the scene unfolded, Bake sprang forward in a desperate attempt to save Dongwook from certain death. His quick action managed to distract the ant, preventing it from finishing off the now defenseless Dongwook. However, Bake's efforts came at a cost. He charged at the beast, but before he could make any significant move, the magic beast ant swiftly sliced through him and continued forward without hesitation. Nearby, Jungin had been preparing a spell, but the ant was too fast. It slashed at his torso with its claws, and Jungin collapsed to the ground, groaning in pain. The situation was dire, with the group being picked apart one by one. JeJu, who had been waiting for the right moment to strike, finally saw his opportunity. Positioned about 5 paces away from Jungin, he had hidden his presence, hoping to catch the ant off guard. He shot an arrow imbued with mana, confident that it would hit its target from such a close distance. However, to his disbelief, the ant snatched the arrow out of the air with incredible speed and snapped it in half effortlessly.
Wow, that ant is OP.
Shocked and desperate, JeJu tried to knock another arrow and fire again, but the beast was already upon him. By the time he raised his bow, the ant was standing right in front of him. With a swift punch to the face, the ant sent JeJu flying back, leaving him dazed
Yeah,
and
that took like 3
defeated.
hours.
In the midst of the chaos, Dongwook, now with his arms miraculously regenerated, made a final, desperate attempt to fight back. He charged at the ant, throwing his body into the beast with all his might. The impact sent the magic beast ant tumbling to the ground, but it quickly regained its footing, ready to continue the brutal battle. The hunters, despite being repeatedly overpowered, quickly recovered and leaped back into the battle. The ant soon realized there was a healer among them, someone responsible for bringing the wounded hunters back to their feet. Byung-yu, the healer, remained calm. He had a self-defense skill called camouflage, which, similar to stealth, concealed his presence. However, it required him to stay completely still. Despite this limitation, it was an invaluable skill for a healer, allowing Byung-yu to remain hidden while focusing on reviving his comrades without being detected. As the ant sensed that the healing magic was coming from a hidden source, it changed its tactics. It grabbed Dongwook, the sturdiest of the hunters, by the legs and held him upside down in the air. The ant slowly began to break Dongwook's corpse bones, and Byung-ju had no choice but to pour all his healing magic into Dong-wook, desperate to keep him alive. If Byung-ju stopped, Dong-wook would surely die. He sweated profusely as he continued casting, his heart pounding in his chest. Suddenly, the ant's gaze locked onto Byung-ju's location. His heart sank as the realization hit him. His cover had been blown. Before he could react, the ant vanished from sight, moving with terrifying speed. In a terrifying moment, Baek suddenly realized the danger, but it was too late. Byung-ju felt an intense burning pain in his abdomen. When he looked down, he saw a massive hole in his stomach with the black, deadly arm of the magic beast ant protruding through it. Blood poured from the wound, and the agony was unbearable, as if his entire body was engulfed in flames. Byung-ju raised his head and locked eyes with Baek. He managed to call out, "Baek, run." The words were weak but filled with urgency. Baek, desperate to help his friend, tried to stand, but his injured leg refused to support his weight. He was wounded, unable to move quickly enough. Then with a sickening crunch, the ant bit off Byung-ju's head. The sound of bones and flesh being crushed echoed in the den, followed by another gruesome crunch. "No!" Baek screamed in despair as he hobbled toward the scene, but the ant had already abandoned Byung-ju's lifeless, headless body and now grabbed Baek by the neck. The hunter struggled with all his might, trying to break free from the beast's powerful grip, but it was futile.
Oh, hey Diana. Oh, snap. I didn't even see you talk to me. Sorry. It's anime. It's anime. Sorry. It didn't show my chat for some reason. They messaged me. My bad.
The creature was far too strong. To Baek's horror, the magic beast ant opened its mouth and began to speak. "Baek, run. Baek, run." The voice that came out was a perfect imitation of Byung-ju's, only it was distorted with strange, unnatural cracks. It was as if the ant had somehow absorbed not just Byung-ju's life, but also his voice. "Run. Baek," the creature repeated, its eyes fixed on Baek, who was too shocked to respond. Then with chilling calmness, the ant looked Baek straight in the eyes and said, "You are weak." The words that followed were even more disturbing. The ant, in a familiar language, began to speak of its queen. "Our queen was killed. I killed your soldiers, but it's not enough. Who is your king?" Baek's eyes widened in shock and confusion. The creature was not just mimicking Byung-yu's voice. It had gained his knowledge and strength. The beast tightened its grip on Baek's neck, squeezing harder as it demanded, "Where is your king?" Baek's mind raced, trying to think of a way out. He knew Haein was the strongest among them, but she was unconscious and couldn't help. Panic set in as he realized the dire situation they were in. The ant seemed to sense something, lifting its head as if searching for something specific. It glanced outside the den as if detecting a strong presence far off in the distance. Then, as if deciding Baek was no longer worth its time, the beast dropped him to the ground like a discarded toy. Baek landed heavily, gasping for breath and trying to regain his composure. The ant disappeared in a flash, moving with incredible speed toward whatever it had sensed outside. Baek coughed, struggling to breathe, and frantically took stock of the situation. He wondered if the creature was heading toward Goto, the Japanese hunter who had been leading the defense outside. But there was no time to dwell on that. The hunters needed to escape before the beast returned, or worse, before more enemies arrived. However, as Baek looked around, he heard a sound that filled him with dread. While they had been battling the powerful magic beast ant, the army of ants that had been outside had made their way back to the nest. Now countless ants were pouring into the queen's den, swarming in overwhelming numbers. The situation had gone from bad to worse, and the hunters were now surrounded by an unstoppable tide of enemies. They had to find a way out, and fast. The atmosphere was tense as Team Alpha continued their mission, led by Goto. He noticed something was off when they lost contact with Team Charlie, and now they couldn't reach Team Delta either. Goto suspected that something might be wrong with the signals, though they should still be within range. He quickly tried to communicate with Team Bravo to assess the situation. Team Bravo responded, confirming they were alive and well, but they too had lost contact with Charlie and Delta. Goto instructed them to finish up what they were doing and wait at the rendezvous point while Team Alpha went to check on the missing teams. As Team Alpha approached the location where Team Delta had been stationed, they were greeted by a horrific sight. The members of Team Delta had been massacred, their bodies strewn across the area. Goto was momentarily speechless, struggling to comprehend the brutality of the scene. Meanwhile, Matsumoto, back at headquarters, contacted Goto for an update. Goto, still processing the gruesome discovery, reported that some of their hunters had been found dead. Matsumoto, though disturbed, seemed more concerned with the implications of their losses. He reminded Goto that they had chosen to fight against the mutant ants specifically to avoid such a situation, yet here they were, with hunters lost. Goto remained cold and composed, dismissing the deaths as a consequence of the hunter's weakness. Matsumoto, though slightly taken aback by Goto's harshness, accepted the explanation, focusing instead on the broader picture. As long as Goto was still in the game, the loss of a few hunters wasn't a significant concern. The conversation shifted to the South Korean team, who were currently engaged in a fight with the Ant Queen. Matsumoto inquired about their chances of survival, and Goto, with his extensive experience, grimly assessed that the South Koreans had a 0% chance of making it out alive. This seemed to please Matsumoto, who saw the situation as an opportunity to manipulate the narrative and achieve their ultimate goal, the annihilation of the South Korean S ranks. As Goto prepared to pull his team out, something unexpected happened. Before he could finish his sentence, the magic beast ant suddenly appeared, moving with blinding speed. It attacked Ishida first, severing her head in an instant. The sheer force and speed of the attack shocked Minoru, who stood frozen in fear. Goto quickly realized that this was no ordinary ant. He ordered Minoru to join Team Bravo, insisting that if the beast was as strong as it appeared, Minoru would only be in the way. The presence of this ant was unlike anything Goto had encountered before. It exuded a menacing, threatening aura that unsettled even him. As Goto prepared to face the beast, it did something extraordinary. It spoke. The ant, in a deep, unsettling voice, asked, "Are you the king?" Startled by the fact that an ant was speaking, Goto smirked and arrogantly replied, while drawing his sword, declaring that he was indeed the king. But the moment the ant received its answer, it unleashed its full magical power. The air around Goto suddenly became icy, the temperature dropping so sharply that goosebumps rose on his skin and the hair on the back of his neck stood up. This sensation was eerily familiar. It reminded him of the power exuded by Sung JeJu. Before Goto could fully grasp what was happening, the magic beast ant made its move with lightning speed. In an instant, Goto's head was severed from his body, falling to the ground.
Bro, all the anticipation and he still got clapped without fighting back. Ah, this is so disappointing.
With a dull thud, the powerful hunter who had once commanded so much fear and respect was taken down in a single brutal strike. The Korean team found themselves completely overwhelmed by the relentless swarm of ants. The situation was dire, with Dongwook, Baek, Jongin, and even the cameraman struggling to fend off the seemingly endless wave of creatures. They fought with everything they had, but the ants kept coming, their numbers unceasing. Baek, realizing the severity of their predicament, desperately called out to Jongin, urging him to increase the intensity of his flames. Jongin, however, knew the dangers of doing so. If he pushed his fire magic any further, he risked burning through all the oxygen in the enclosed space, suffocating everyone inside. The entire team had sustained serious injuries, their bodies battered and bruised from the relentless assault. JeJu had done his best to heal them, but his powers were not enough to fully restore their strength. Among them, Jongin was their best hope. His powerful flames were the only thing standing between them and total annihilation by the ants. As the ants closed in, Baek couldn't help but wonder if this was the end. The thought of their mission failing and their lives ending here weighed heavily on him. His mind raced as he tried to come up with a plan, but despair was beginning to creep in. Just then, Baek felt a sudden presence behind him. Instinctively, he spun around, ready to strike, but what he saw made him hesitate. It wasn't another ant. Standing before him was a soldier clad in black armor, a figure unlike any he had seen before. The soldier moved with swift precision, crushing two ants effortlessly, their bodies crumpling under his immense strength. Baek was taken aback. He struggled to comprehend what he was seeing. The black-armored soldier stared down at him, and through the haze of his vision, Baek realized that this was no ordinary soldier. The soldier's dark, ominous presence began to consume the frame, drawing all attention to his cold, unblinking eyes. The world around him faded, replaced by the sprawling city. As the view zoomed in, the outline of a man emerged. It was Sung JeJu, his expression as steely as the soldier's armor, a cold glint in his eyes that betrayed no emotion. He stared out from the shadows, his presence commanding and unyielding. Then in a voice that resonated with a quiet but undeniable power, JeJu spoke a single word that reverberated through the void: exchange. Thanks for watching. Like, share.
That's crazy. Shout out to this channel, Living Craftly. Um, maybe Thursday. I'm gonna come back Thursday, guys. Thanks for joining the live. And we're gonna. I didn't talk much because I got really into it. I'm gonna lie. Plus, I don't think you guys would want me to talk. But this is fire. All right, guys. I'm gonna check you guys in the next stream. Thank you for tuning in.